Good afternoon. It's Thursday, August the 11th, 2016. I'm Mike Snyder. I'm here at Carlisle Fire and Rescue Services with Jake Baker. Good afternoon, Jake.
Good afternoon.
Can you verify that you are aware that we are audio and video recording this and we have your permission to do that?
Yes,
Okay. You're from Carlisle, right?
that's correct.
Where were you living when you were born? Where was your family from?
428 North East Street,
Okay.
Carlisle,
And how old are you now?
72.
Okay. So when you were growing up, what school did you go to?
Started out at the Penn School building,
Mm-hmm.
from the Penn to the Lee Tort. Then we moved out on North Pitt Street, and I went to Stevens School.
Mm-hmm.
From Stevens, I went to the Lamberton, and then from the Lamberton, I went to Cumberland Valley.
Okay. So your family moved again? You went to Cumberland
Yes.
Valley then?
I lived in Middlesex then.
Okay. You graduated from Cumberland Valley High School.
Well, actually, I left school to help out at home.
Okay.
But I got my GED.
Excellent. Did you play any sports, or did you not have time for anything like that because of work?
Didn't have time. I was working, helping us take care of my family, my parents.
Excellent. What did your parents do?
My father was a truck driver. He was a veteran of World War II. He got wounded in the Battle of the Bulge. My mother, she was a housewife, but she worked as a waitress at times too.
Mm-hmm. Did you have siblings?
I had a sister and 3 other brothers.
Okay. Are you the oldest, the youngest?
I'm the oldest, and my youngest brother, it's just him and I now.
Okay. So after you went to the high school and you had to work to help your family, then I believe you joined the service?
Well, I got married and to my first wife, and yes, I joined the National Guards for 6 years. And while I was in the National Guards, prior to that, I worked in a garage down on the Harrisburg Pike, the Mobile station, which was where I got friends of mine talked to me that knew me, that came in there, business people, and said that I should try getting in the police department. So I took their advice and filled out an application and found out, took the test, and became a police officer.
What year was that?
That was August 11th, which is today,
Wow.
1967.
So this is your 49th year anniversary for signing on to the police department in
Yes.
Carlisle. Whenever you came onto the police department, I'm sure that training was a lot different than it is now. Do you remember, did you go somewhere for training?
I first went to Harrisburg City Police School down in Harrisburg.
Mm-hmm.
Did that. That was put on by the state. I did 2 years of that, and then any other training that came along after that, I was done with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally in 1975, I went to the State Police Academy
Okay.
for the municipal police officers.
Do you remember who the chief was when you were appointed?
When I first started, it was Sergeant Frank Giordano. He was acting chief at the time.
Okay.
And
And then
then he
shortly
became
thereafter,
chief.
he was appointed
Yeah.
chief. Who was the mayor then, do you remember?
Charles Wise.
Okay, so he swore you in.
Yes.
Okay. And I know that technology is a lot different now than it probably was then. Do you remember what equipment you were issued when you joined the department?
I was issued a revolver, handcuffs, a nightstick, what they call a sap.
Okay, it's like a striking device.
Yes, yeah.
And
Non-lethal.
right. And in the cars, you didn't have rifles then. You had shotguns.
We had. That's a little. Let me think. I think we had shotguns. We did not have any AM, FM radios in the car at that time.
Okay.
We did not have any air conditioning in the car, and our cars were painted black and white back then.
Mm-hmm. But you did have a radio to communicate back and forth with the station.
Well, there were some around.
Okay. Did you have portable radios?
Not very many. Not as many as what we should have had for the men.
Mm-hmm.
But we had banks of portables that in the station that we grabbed whoever were working.
Mm-hmm.
And back then, when we were on, we had to do foot patrol downtown.
Mm-hmm.
And we had call boxes that we had to go to every hour we were there.
And you would call back to the station and check with the desk sergeant?
If I was on duty, say, in the evening, or even in daylight, and midnight shift, when you were walking foot patrol, which we did, because 3 to 11 in midnight shift, we covered the downtown, checking to make sure the stores are locked and nobody's breaking in anywhere. And some of the businesses, like the bars that were open, we were nearby if there was a call. But you had a call box like on Liberty Avenue beside the courthouse, the new courthouse. You had a call box on South Pitt Street, there at the corner of South Pitt and West High. And then the third call box was up around on at West Lawler Street at North Hanover Street.
Okay.
And when you walked foot patrol, you had to make sure that you caught all those call boxes during your walking tour.
So you had a key, and they were just
Yeah.
phones in the box that you would call back
That's
to the
correct.
station. Okay. And during that time, do you remember how many appointed or sworn officers there were on the department?
When I started, I was number 18.
Okay, so you were issued badge 18.
No, actually, I was issued badge 9.
Okay, so you were issued badge 9, but there were 18 sworn officers.
Correct.
And
I was
everyone-
the 18th one.
Everyone was full-time then?
That's correct.
Okay.
And back in those times when I was working there, there was fire police. And actually, back then, the fire police were armed,
Mm-hmm.
and they rode along with the patrol cars.
So they were basically auxiliary police
Yes.
officers. Okay. You said that Chief Giordano was the chief. Do you remember who the other ranking officers were when you started?
There was a Sergeant Adler,
Is that Richard Adler?
yes.
Okay.
John Adler,
Okay.
Richard's father.
Okay.
John Adler, Mervyn Hill, and Leroy Washington, who was a black officer.
Okay. Were they basically the sergeant for each shift? There were 3 shifts, and they each had one?
That's correct.
Okay. Did you rotate, or were you assigned to a shift back then?
Rotated.
Okay. And do you remember any major incidents during your first, 3, 4, 5 years, whenever you first started on the department?
I remember, I think my first red light call was a body was found at the bottom of the cave at Cave Hill.
Okay.
And I responded out there with lights and siren.
Okay.
And found an individual, a Spanish person, that was laying at the bottom of the cave.
Do you remember if that was suspicious circumstances? Or?
If it was suspicious, somebody, he apparently got intoxicated and got in an argument, I guess, and they took him out there and threw him over. As far as the solving of that, I'm not sure if anybody was ever caught on it.
Okay. I've heard stories before that sometimes Carlisle officers would go out and assist the state police and things like that. Do you remember a shooting that occurred at the Midway during a burglary in the late 60s?
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell us that story? Do you know the details of that?
Yeah. I'm trying to think. Well, the details of that story was we were backing up state police. They requested our assistance, and I wasn't working back then. I was off, and that was back when I had a K9.
Mm-hmm.
And I was home with being off sick with problems with my foot. When I got the call to go out to the bowling alley with the dog, yes, we got in when they responded out there and they had the place surrounded, one of our officers went into the bowling alley, and there were the pool tables were back in the corner. The individual popped up from behind one of the pool tables and started firing, and gunfire was returned. The subject was wounded. The officer wasn't wounded, but the subject was wounded. At least we found out 5 times. Superficial wounds, enough to cause him to bleed. And I was called out there to assist with the K-9, and then William Castle from Lower Island Township, who was another K-9 officer. He was called. I started the first track with the dog in the snow drifts. That was a year we had a bad snow. And tracked him across the road, up over the hill, across Holly Pike, and up through the fields, and lost his track from the blood splatter. Whenever when I stopped, he had went over the fence, and the blood had froze dry on it. Or was froze on the fence, and we didn't see it, and the dog didn't get the whiff of it.
Okay.
And then we tracked, and I went back down to get better shoes because I was in loafers, and my father had brought me up a pair of boots at daylight, about an hour or 2 later. So then by that time Castle came, and we started the track again. And we tracked the individual up to Western Village, where he stole a dump truck, and then drove down to Lower Island Township along 15 there by Ross Moyne Road at a trailer park where he lived. And searching the place where he lived, blood was found there where he came home and got cleaned up, and him and his family left and went. We don't know where he went, but eventually we got a call from Columbus, Ohio, where an individual stopped in the hospital to be treated for gunshot wounds. And that's how we found him.
Wow. That sounds like some pretty good police work to find somebody in Columbus, Ohio, with the technology probably being a little bit slower back then as far as communication.
In the old days, they had the teletypes. Yeah. They didn't have the computerized stuff.
Now, you mentioned briefly there that you had a dog. When did you get a dog, and do you remember the dog's name?
I got the dog in '68. And myself and another individual got a dog, and we had 2 dogs at that time. It was in '68.
Was it a German Shepherd?
German Shepherd. Registered name was Hans Seewald von Little Cove. I purchased him from a Harrisburg police officer that raised and trained dogs.
It's very interesting. One of the other major cases from the early 70s time period that a lot of people read the book is Bessie's house. Do you remember Miss Jones?
Yes, sir. I was working the desk that night.
Okay. Can you tell us briefly what you remember about that?
Well, what I remember is we got a call that she was murdered, and our people went down to the scene. They found her down there in the bed, stabbed. And then I got reports from the officers and detectives on the scene, advising that who it was, Georgia Snyder, allegedly, and she supposedly got a taxi from Harrisburg. So with that information, I made a call to state police on the turnpike, because from what information we got, she may be headed towards McKeesport.
Because she was from that area, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And she got stopped up in the On the turnpike, actually, by the state police at the Newville Barracks. Got stopped out going westbound in a taxi out by the tunnels.
And we probably should say that she was acquitted at trial,
That's correct.
and no one was ever arrested and convicted for that murder. One of the other major incidents that ties in a little with your fire service is another homicide that was the Strand Theater fire. Were you working the police, or were you there on the fire side for
I
that?
was working the police that day.
You have any recollection of that incident?
Other than a search was made of the building after the fire department got everything down, the fire down, and a body was found inside this Strand, or inside the Strand, I think. Maybe no, but there was an individual, a female, jumped out the window. When she jumped out, she hit the parking meter or whatever, and died.
And that case is still being adjudicated, but there was some
That individual is, I guess, just here shortly, a long time ago, got out of prison. And she's
Right,
here.
right, Miss Smallwood. Not talking about the belief whether she's guilty or innocent, because that's not our place to decide, but
correct.
there's some discrepancy as to whether it was an arson fire or not. From what you witnessed being there, did it seem to you like it was an arson fire? Do you have any?
I would say yes.
Okay. Do you have any other recollection of any other police incidents during the 70s that popped to mind?
Oh, right after I started in the 60s, 67, about 3-4 weeks after I started, my first call, I went along with Chief Giordano and Sergeant Calvin Baker, and him and I and the chief went up to. We got a report from New York City, New York State, of an individual that killed his girlfriend, strangled her, and he may be in Carlisle, staying at the James Wilson Hotel. And the three of us, this was in the daylight shift, the three of us went up there and knocked on the door, and the subject didn't come right away, but we heard some noise like could have been a shotgun
Being racked?
being racked, bullet in. But we found out later it wasn't. But as soon as he answered the door, we grabbed him and pulled him out into the hallway, took him into custody with no incident.
During that time period, was there any unrest due to the activities during the 60s with changes?
Vietnam War, yes. We had civil disturbances. We had our fires that were set in during the year when that was going on. Down at the old livestock market, which is used to be down by Agway, where Agway was, there by the railroad tracks.
On East North Street.
On East North Street. That was set on fire. There's several other fires. There was a fire at the coal yard up on West North Street. That was an arson. We had marches by the SDS, Students for Democratic Society.
Dickinson College students.
Correct, and the Black Panthers.
Now, were those generally peaceful protests?
No. At one time, we had the group of individuals from the college came to the Borough Hall. And back then, we were working, we were in the station 24 hours a day.
So during that time period, the Borough Hall is 53 West South Street, and
Correct.
the police station is in the basement of that building.
That's correct.
Okay. So, I'm sorry, go on.
That's right. There was a meeting up in the town hall, and the individuals, the big group of them, weren't satisfied with what the results were of the meeting. And I wasn't on duty yet. They they traveled out North Pitt Street, South Pitt Street, towards West High Street, and in doing so, they threw garbage cans and stuff around and broke some windows. And then I was called, and me and Detective Warner was called, and we both jumped in the patrol car with the dog, and we went on patrol, and we found we were surveilling where they were traveling, and when we come up High Street there in the 100 block, we saw them there on the south side of the street going west towards the college, and it was a group of them. I went past them and I heard somebody hollering something derogatory and something to the reference of bring that dog back, and they kept walking, and so we turned around to break it up, and we ended up breaking the group up, moving them up to the college, and at the same time we chased an individual who was caught and arrested and taken into custody.
Other than those fairly isolated incidents during the war years, what do you think the relationship was between the college students and the community? Did it seem to be a disconnect, or did it seem to be pretty?
Well, on some individuals at the college, yes, I felt there was a disconnect, or, but at one time, during those times of civil disturbance, we were, our K-9 people, we had actually 5 dogs. And we would, when they went to march on the Army War College, we followed 2 dogs in a van on the side street, keeping a watch on them as they go, and in case there was disturbances, they marched out to the front of the Army War College on North Hanover Street, which was back then was the main entrance, and they were stopped by the military there, and we stood by on the outer part on the perimeter, keeping the eye on everybody that was involved.
Now, I believe that was in the spring of 1970, and they marched out there and had some speeches and then marched back to town.
Yeah.
And everything was fairly orderly, and no one got
Yes.
injured. Okay. How long did you have a dog? Do you remember?
I had the dog probably till 71. He got, German Shepherds are known to get hip dysplasia, and with all the work that I did with the dog and stuff, training and doing the obstacles and all that stuff there, the dog got hip dysplasia.
So you had him in service for 3-4 years, somewhere
and
around
I had
there.
to put him down.
Okay. What type of canine vehicles did you have back then?
We used regular patrol cars. At one time we had a station wagon that we used, a Chevrolet station wagon. But most of the time the chief had a patrol car set up to put a dog in.
And I assume that the dog lived with you and your family?
That's correct.
Moving on to the middle part or the later part of your career, you were promoted to corporal, right?
In 1975, yes, sir.
Okay. And after that period, you were still reported to the sergeant, but in the sergeant's absence, you would run the shift.
Yes. 75 is when I was corporal, was when I had went to State Police Academy for 12 weeks.
Were you in patrol during your entire career, or did you have other specialized duties? Were you ever a detective?
I was in charge of the criminal section before Chief Giordano retired. Actually, I was the operations sergeant for a period of time in '89.
Okay.
And then in part of '90, until Chief Margison came, I was acting chief for that interim.
Were you the senior sergeant during that time period?
Yes.
Okay.
I was a senior sergeant until the day I retired.
Do you remember when that happened? Like who retired to move you into the basically second in command at that point, right?
Yes.
There were no lieutenants at that point.
No, it wasn't no lieutenants, not until in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Sergeant Lamison was the one that was in charge when he was still living. Then when he retired before Chief Giordano did, and Sergeant Baker retired before Chief Giordano did, so
You
I
moved up.
Yeah.
Okay. I believe you told me before that you were a crime scene officer.
Sergeant, yes. Before I made the rank of sergeant, when I was corporal, before I went to State Police Academy also, Sergeant Lamson came to me one day and asked me if I could do a crime scene drawing of the McDonald's on East High Street. They had a robbery there where the employees were put in the freezer, walk-in freezer. So I did that, and that was my start of being a crime scene technician, and I did that for 20 years.
And there were very few people that had that skill set, so you did
There
that
was
throughout the county.
No other police officers that did it on the side.
Mm-hmm.
I did crime scenes for the township and borough police departments in the county. That when the DA would request me,
Mm-hmm.
I did all the major crimes for the state police in the county when I was requested.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a good thing that we had it. And basically, what I was doing was taking my rough drawing after I'm out and measure everything by hand,
Mm-hmm.
put it on a piece of graph paper, a rough drawing, and then eventually put it onto a big piece of poster board with the scene, this helped the jury
Mm-hmm.
when they were deciding the cases.
Were you also doing photographs?
No, I did not do.
Okay, so you were primarily drawings.
Back then,
Scales.
the police department had
Mr. Steinmetz?
Simons.
Okay.
He was the photographer for the police department for crime scenes.
And moving on a little to the 80s, I know one of the cases that we've talked about in the past is a homicide
1985.
that occurred on Kerrs Avenue, right?
Right. That was a Sunday afternoon, hot and humid. At 4 o'clock, I got sent by the sergeant to go down Kerrs Avenue and see what's going on down there. I got down there and coming in up Kerrs Avenue from Hanover Street, I observed a body laying up a street on the right, and I was advised that there was another body inside and an individual barricaded in there with a rifle.
Mm-hmm.
And there was 2 small children standing in their diapers outside the front door on the step. So my first immediate thing was to get those children out of the way.
Okay.
And then help came. I had help from the DA's office, county detective. He came and I handed him the children. He was the first there. And by that time, then the rest of the patrols came.
And do you remember how long that incident took to come to conclusion?
Couple hours, 3-4 hours, because it was dark whenever it did come to a conclusion.
Mm-hmm. And Chief,
But we had him secured in there; he couldn't go nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
And the chief of police, Giordano, talked him out with a bullhorn.
Okay.
And that was the beginning. Back in the 60s, when we had the civil disturbances, we had got firearms, rifles from LDAA at the time, from the government.
Law enforcement assistance.
Yes.
Okay.
And we put them in our arms room, and we had them sitting in there and not being used. And I got with Sergeant Baker after that incident, and we got with the Chief Giordano, and that was the beginning of Carlisle's SWAT team.
Okay. And so you responded out there and you realized that you didn't necessarily have the tactical equipment and skills that maybe you needed to handle situations like that in the future.
I didn't have a bulletproof vest on me. I didn't have a shield to carry. All I had was me.
So did Carlisle officers have vests at that time? You just didn't have it that day?
I don't think we had them then.
Okay. And there were no shields available at all?
No.
Okay.
When we did get them, finally we did get them right after that, I believe. We had them, and then when I got the SWAT team form, I got us shields for entry from ProTech, I think it was.
Do you remember who some of the first operators were on your SWAT team from the department?
Yeah, it was Bobby Hayes, Ronnie Nestor, Ronnie Egoff, Mike Guido, Barry Walters. I think that was the first of them.
Okay.
And then later on, we added some more. By the time I left in 1995, there was probably 10. And then right after I retired, they got with other departments in the county and formed the county SWAT team.
The Cumberland County SRT.
Yeah.
Whenever you were operating as the Carlisle Police Department, did you go outside the borough to assist, or was it primarily inside the borough?
Inside the borough until we got the multi-jurisdictional thing.
Okay. In the 90s, like you said, in the early 90s, before Chief Stephen Margison came on board, you were acting chief. After he did come on board, you were a patrol sergeant running a shift. Is that right?
I was in charge of the criminal section.
Okay.
And then Chief Margison wanted to get some lieutenants on board, so they had to test for lieutenants, and then Lieutenant Kaiser and Lieutenant Walters were the lieutenants, and I moved back to patrol.
Okay. Do you remember any stories that stick out to you as particularly funny or humorous during your time on the department?
It probably was. I mean, stupid things happened. And that was one thing, you know, sometimes you could laugh at what happened, but and be serious when you can't laugh. And I think that helped keep my sanity.
So you retired then from the Carlisle Police Department in 1995, is that right?
Yes, sir.
28 years of service.
Yes.
And during that 28 years, you were also appointed as a part-time deputy sheriff for Cumberland County, is that right?
Yes, I worked on my days off when the Sheriff Baylor would need me, or Sheriff Beck. I'd work on I'd get scheduled, and they'd let me know if they needed help, and I'd work. I did that for 18 years.
And then after you retired from Carlisle, you switched over.
I retired on a Friday from the borough of Carlisle in 95, and on Monday afternoon, or Monday morning, that following Monday, I went to work for the sheriff full time for another, I was in my 18th year when I retired from the sheriff's office.
So you had over 45 years of law enforcement experience here in Cumberland County.
Yes, sir.
That's pretty impressive. Thank you for that service. During that time at the Sheriff's Department, I know one of your duties was the warrant section. Is that primarily what you did during your entire career there?
I did regular duties at the Sheriff's office, like the regular deputies, and then I was put over into the warrant section, where we handled escapees from the prison, which were most of the time were walk release inmates.
Walkaways.
Walkaways. And one thing with Sheriff Klein, he wanted us to track them down and find them and get them back in, which we did.
That's Sheriff Tom Klein, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And then you also worked for Sheriff Anderson during your later years, is that right?
Yeah.
Anything during that time period, any folks that stick out or are memorable that you work with at the Sheriff's Department that you want to talk about?
Oh, all the men that I worked with at the Sheriff's Office and women were good people. I had a couple. We would when I first got there, Sheriff Tom Pine left me. I made arrests, traffic arrests, in the beginning, and I did investigations like tracking these people down. And I took a woman one time, a walk-off from the prison. I worked on that case for 2.5 years and got her brought back from Illinois.
Wow.
And before I retired, I had a walk-off from the prison, from their place of employment where they were, and I tracked them down. It was a male, and he had a female companion that he hooked up with, and they got arrested out in Colorado after stealing, burglarizing a home in Tyrone, and then they hit New Mexico, Utah, Oregon, and I kept tracking them the whole time, and I finally got them back right before I retired.
Now, you're talking about some of these fugitives many states away. Did you take trips to recover them and transport them back?
I did a lot of extraditions, yes. Driving extraditions and flying. I flied a couple times while I was there.
That seems like something that could be difficult or problematic. Did you ever have any issues bringing people back? You're with people that are under arrest for a long period of time.
No, I tried to treat them with respect, which made my trip easier.
Mm-hmm.
My main goal was to make sure that they did not escape from my custody.
Mm-hmm.
They were shackled and belted and handcuffed, and there was myself and another deputy. We would bring them home. I went to Alaska, sheriff and I brought one back. Yes, I tried to. If we were on a trip, we fed them.
Mm-hmm.
And made sure they could go to the restroom or whatever. I mean, they were told prior to leaving, here's the rules of the road, and I never had any problem with anybody.
Yeah, you treated them with respect, and you got it back.
Yes.
Okay. Wrapping up your law enforcement career, I guess, when did you retire from the Sheriff's Department?
I retired March of 2012.
Okay. Is there anything else that you can think of during your Carlisle Police or Sheriff's Department career that you think would be interesting or you'd like to get on the record?
No.
Okay.
Everything. Once you're in law enforcement, you should, hopefully, that's what you want to do, and be dedicated to your job.
This is sort of a difficult period right now for law enforcement. Officers are under a great deal of scrutiny. Things like body camera technology, obviously that wasn't something that was there whenever you were an officer, but do you think that's a good thing, a bad thing?
Anything to help a police officer on the street to handle any situation and document that situation is good.
Do you think that during your career you experienced good relations with the minority community here in Carlisle? Do you think that was an issue?
There was some issues, but we always tried to handle it. Get along with people, which we did.
Mm-hmm.
There's good people.
Then let's change gears a little bit and let's talk about your service as a member of the fire department here in Carlisle, which I think you're approaching your 50th year of that as well. You joined the Cumberland Fire Company, is that right?
That's correct.
When was that?
67.
Okay. And you lived on the East End near the station at the time?
No, actually I lived out in Homar Estates on South Spring Garden Street.
Okay.
Trailer court out there.
What do you think made you join the Cumberland? Did you know some folks there, or how did you reach that station?
Yes, I knew folks from there.
Okay. And during your early time at the Cumberland, do you remember who the president was or who the foreman was?
Well, Bill Allwood was a foreman one time.
Mm-hmm.
William Allwood. Mark Boyles was another foreman. Johnny Schaefer was foreman at one time during the 70s, I believe. I'm trying to think who the foreman was in the beginning when I was there. I think it was Bill Allwood.
Okay. And fairly quickly, you had positions with the company of responsibility. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, one thing I did, I was a relief driver. I drove the equipment when I was there,
Mm-hmm.
working shift work or whatever.
When were relief drivers required during that time period? Do you remember? Was it weekends or evenings?
Weekends.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you remember who the drivers were whenever you first came on board?
Well, when I first came aboard, Red Hayes was the driver back then,
Mm-hmm.
or Budman. Mr. Budman was. He was after Red Hayes.
Okay.
Mr. Budman was the driver, and some of the relief drivers I think were Dick Sugarts, one who later on became the driver.
He was the full-time driver for over 20 years.
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, yeah, over 20. He's got 50 years coming up too.
Okay. During that time period, the drivers were important for the operation of the station. They were there the most, and if you were in the good graces of the driver, you were probably doing okay. Likewise, if you were in the bad graces, you might not have a good experience. Do you remember anything about any of those folks, good, bad, otherwise?
No, everybody was all right. Everybody got along. There was times you had conflicts with somebody, but we got it straightened out.
The Cumberland was fairly well known for having a lot of people around, being a very active station. Can you describe a day at the Cumberland for us? How many people are around, what they're doing, the activities around the station?
Well, you'd have probably 10, 12 people sometimes during the day. It was volunteers. Back then we had volunteers. There was no paid people except the drivers. We ran ambulance, we ran rescue, we ran fire.
You brought up the ambulance. Is that something that you participated in as a member? Did you drive the ambulances as well?
I drove ambulance, and actually I had first aid training years ago, and I rode in the back sometimes too, either to help us. Then we got EMTs,
Mm-hmm.
and then an EMT would go along and they needed help, and I'd help in the back if they needed, or I'd be driving the ambulance.
When you joined in 1967, can you tell us what the equipment of the company was like, what apparatus you had?
We had a 1947 Aaron's Fox piston pumper. That was our engine. Our rescue truck was a Ford Econoline, an old red flat front Connor line, loaded with rescue tools. And our ambulances were Cadillacs.
Do you remember roughly how many you had at that time?
Cadillacs, we had two.
Okay.
And then later on, we got rid of the Connor line and had Schwab in Elizabethville, Pennsylvania, build us a International Rescue Squad truck.
Okay.
And also they built a Dodge box type ambulance for us too.
And in 1970, the Aaron's Fox pumper was replaced with an American LaFrance.
That's correct.
Do you remember when that was delivered?
No, I don't.
Okay. Were you a driver of that engine as well?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember how long you were a part-time driver for the company?
I think whenever we moved
When you merged in 1984?
in '84.
Okay. We talked briefly about the Strand fire and Bessie's house during your service with the police department. Were there any other fires that you attended with the fire company in the late 60s, early 70s that...
We had the fire up on West High Street there where used to be Harris Bank or whatever. There was a bowling alley there, a drugstore.
The Cumberland Valley Savings and Loan?
Yeah, there by where the Cumberland Valley Savings and Loan was.
I believe that's June of 1970.
We had the bowling alley, Maple Lanes, I think it was. There was a drugstore built in beside there on the south side of High Street, West High. And we responded with the Fox on that fire call. And we went around and the back, and when we went through the back door of the fire, it was burning.
Mm-hmm.
So then we hooked up to the fire hydrant, and the Fox hooked up lines from other fire engines to feed off too.
And that was quite a long-term operation, right?
Yes.
It started very late at night, and you were still there in mid-afternoon.
It was early in the morning when the call came in.
Okay.
And then we were, I was up on top of the roof with other individuals. They got a flat roof and it started to bubble, and they told us to get off.
Mm-hmm.
So we did.
Are there any other fires during that time frame that stick out in your mind?
No, I'm sure there was other ones, but that was one of the big ones.
Okay. During 1980, the American LaFrance engine was converted to a rescue squad, and you
yes.
got rid of the other rescue squad. Is that something that was popular or unpopular within the company? Was that controversial at all?
It was some controversial, but in the end, everybody enjoyed what we did with it.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, that truck was responding to a call in '81 down in Middlesex. Got on in the Middlesex and was going northbound and going the ramp and rolled over on its side. And nobody was injured.
Mm-hmm. I think that was around 1984. It was very icy at exit 52. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And I believe that was Dick Sugarts, the career driver that was driving
He was
it.
driving, and I forget who was on the squad with him.
Okay. Nobody was seriously
Nobody got
injured.
hurt.
Okay. But the company did sell that piece of apparatus then and replaced it with a Sutphen rescue squad shortly thereafter. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. During that same time period, the company decided to merge with the Goodwill Fire Company and move to West Ridge Street.
We were notified and talked to in reference to Goodwill, yes. And we decided to go to Goodwill.
Mm-hmm. There was some controversy over that,
Yes, there
and there was some pressure involved.
Yes.
Is that something that you felt at the time was a good idea for the company or a bad idea in retrospect?
Well, I don't think, no fire company wants to move once they're situated. But we at the Cumberland were in the process of trying to purchase the Penn School building property, which is next to the old fire station.
Okay.
We were promised that we could get it, and then the borough manager got another deal with a realtor, and so we didn't get it. And we were working out of the front of the firehouse, plus we had a garage in the back that we had equipment in, which that the reason we were working in the back, the other reason was eventually in '74 we had a fire where we lost 2 members in the fire station. And the members we got back in operation in '75, a year after that.
I believe that was June 27th, 1974. Were you at that fire?
Yes, I came in. I wasn't at it. I responded from home.
Can you tell us briefly what your memories of that night are?
I can remember the smoke and the flames, and Dick Schubert's got the equipment out, and some of the other members that were there got all the equipment out of the bay in the front there on the Lauder Street entrance. It was hectic, and it was a shame that we lost 2 members.
One member was lost that evening, and then one member died a few days later. Is that right?
Yes, I believe the one member and then the other person, yeah.
And then the company had a few options, but decided to stay at the current station and restore it. Is that right?
Yes, yep.
Okay. And then a year later,
In '84, then we were approached about going to the Goodwill and housing there to Goodwill, jointly with Goodwill. And so a little controversy on that with the older members at Cumberland, but I got them straightened around and everybody agreed.
so you were the president of the Cumberland when that happened.
Yes,
And then after the merger, you were the president of the Cumberland Goodwill, the merged company.
up until the merger with today,
Okay.
in 2010.
During that time period when you were operating as the Cumberland Goodwill out on Ridge Street, there were quite a bit of changes, especially on the EMS side of the company. A lot of the volunteers became paid staff just because of the call volume, and
The training and had to be done that the state needed, and the same with the drivers and the firefighters. I mean, the volunteer system sort of faded out.
that's one of the things that I was going to ask you about a little bit later. During your experiences over almost 50 years, you've seen the volunteer system change quite a bit, especially in regards to the number of people available. Is that something that you think that we're going to be able to sustain, or do you think that the volunteer system is going to go away?
I hope it doesn't, but younger people that joined the fire station, they were young and single then, and eventually got married and have a family, so that hurt a little bit there, because they couldn't be as obligated as what they were when they were single, and I understand that. But yeah, sooner or later I would imagine if the volunteer system will not be volunteer anymore.
You mentioned briefly the fact that the Cumberland Goodwill was asked again to consider merging, and the company decided to do that and merge with the Empire Friendship Fire Company in 2009. It took effect in early 2010. and we became Carlisle Fire and Rescue Services, which is the museum that we're in right now. Looking back 6 years, do you think that that was a good idea, or do you think that...
My opinion, yes.
Okay.
I was, everything that was done with the Goodwill, when we merged to the Goodwill, it was all taken before the company. There were some company members that didn't like it, and that I took a lot of flack from. But, you know, it was a company decision.
Okay. Before we wrap up, I'd like to just talk about your personal things a little bit. You have children?
Yes.
How many?
I have 2 natural children, my son and my daughter. My daughter, my son, and my daughter's the oldest. And then my wife was deceased, I was married to. She has 4 children.
Okay. Throughout your life, I'm sure you've had many hobbies. I know one of them is you're a pretty good carver. Is that something?
I carve.
Yeah. You carve wood objects?
Yes, sir.
Is that something that you're still doing?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Any other interesting hobbies or anything?
Well, other than hunting and fishing, which I don't do too much about that. I go since I got injured or whatever. And I go hunting out of the farm every year for half a day. Now this past year, when I got out of the hospital, I actually went for a day and a half. I was setting up in the woods.
Excellent.
Shooting, I like to shoot firearms. I was an instructor at the sheriff's office for many years, and also at the police department for many years.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I think that's all the questions that I have. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention to have on the record?
The only thing I would mention is I want to thank you for having the opportunity to give this information. I hope it helps.
Okay, Jake. Well, thank you very much.
One more thing. When I first started on the police department on High Street and Hanover Street, before your time, the parking was angular parking.
Mm-hmm.
And then they got away from it and put it along straight horizontal. And
now we have the road diet.
That's correct.
All right, Jake. Well, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael.